Hey everybody, this is Petey from the Spin Rack, and we also have
Calvin Ellis, ready to rock.
Cal was telling me that Keith Giffen has a podcast, and he was brought up the Legion of Superheroes and the whys that it isn't, it isn't the book it once was. Do you want to go into that?
Well, his podcast, I'm Not Dead Yet, he does go into why he believes that the reboots of the Legion haven't been successful, at least successful since he rebooted the Legion with 5 years later. And a couple of, well, he does note that the Legion, at the time when he took over, this was a gateway book for a lot of readers. That it held the highest amount its readership held the highest amount of younger readers. Okay, and then of course you had as he says, he had the hardcore Legion fans who were also with it. But this was something that a young person could pick up and they could get right into the story. In addition, that they took the charm out of the book and they always decided to tack older with the Legion as it went over. And then when things didn't work, it became reboot after reboot after reboot.
Yeah, well, there's the hard part with the Legion is the the actual history is a little different. There was a successful thing when it was initially as a one story thing. It was successful enough for them to revisit the Legion, and the Legion had what was it? The part of Adventure Comics with a lot of class. Even though it was the initial story was Edmund Hamilton, a lot of stuff from Jerry Siegel added in there. Of course, people go to Jim Shooter, who did a lot of classic stories as a young person. And but the thing about it is, at some point while they were doing it, I guess it's in the 70s, whether it be something for kids or some for the youngest viewers, DC didn't really see it as a book that they should kind of push out, right? So they took their book and they said, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna push them to the back and we're gonna put Supergirl up front. And they pushed them away. And so you had this title that is just going needing is just needing to be a series, that's just asking for it. You have Dave, and then it's a part of Superboy at some point. I think no, it switched editors. It switched editors. So Julie Schwartz didn't keep it. I think it was passed on to another editor. And that's why I'm saying when they say he just kind of, when you said that, he kind of, what caught me was that he didn't talk about the Legion fans and they had the Legion Outposts. The Legion Outposts are the people that gave the Legion a series because for some reason they were always a backup, and at some point they said, "You got to give us this title. Give us a title." So what they did was they did a 4-part mini that was of reprints and sold well enough where they're like, wait a second. And then when he's in Superboy, they're like, wait a second. We think these guys might have some legs. So they shared the title. There wasn't a break between the Superboy stories and Legion stories anymore. It was Superboy and the Legion. And so I really want to say that the Legion fans can't be second guessed. Yes, you can have a lot of young people, but to actually get them a title, it was the Legion fans. And the hard part is the crash ultimately is what ruined a lot of series at Marvel and DC, whereas only X-Men was the one that survived. Stuff like Titans that had long time readership and with big success in the 80s, and these two titles really suffered from the crash. But as said, as you were saying, the reboots didn't help at all, but at this point, this is when the Legion is rolling, right? This is like the Great Darkness Saga, the picture we have up. And they're long in the tooth here. They don't look like teens or kids. They don't look like the Kurt Swan type of young people. They were, they were taking on the Marvel, what's that thing? The Marvel, X-Men, Neil Adams type of grown teens, or tweens that look like they're very much the superheroes that the Justice League are, type of deal. And it was extremely successful. extremely successful with them being kind of long in the tooth. Getting married, that's how you would get rid of some characters. The bouncing boy and dual damsel getting married. Then, Lightning Lad being out for a little while when he got married to Satin Girl. But, it's a book that was, for my opinion, I'd just say the crashes is the biggest thing that hurt that because it also hurt the Titans. And ultimately, the reboots definitely didn't help because you couldn't. But the hard part is that, and you know this as well as anyone, they were just allowing people to reboot, like do their own origins at the same time. It's like, hey, Superman, you got Mark Wade doing his origin, and we got we're gonna do what's the name? What was it? The Secret Origin that Jeff Johns did, and the same with Legion. You had Keith Giffen doing his thing, which I don't initially. I'm pretty sure there was because Keith Giffen was the guy, right? So he was the guy who did this great stuff. It was a different approach. So it was kind of it probably was successful initially, but it was a lot darker. It had some Watchmen stuff into it. It was dealing with a lot of the heavier elements, and they were actually now in their 20s, but it looked like they could be in their 30s. So even though it's 5 years later, but it was like you could see them saying it went too far, kind of like we went too far, like killing Alfred or killing Aunt May. So they're like, let's make him younger. And I think the Birnbaums who was working with them, they had a pretty decent thing of making them really young, like almost a little bit around where Kurt Swan had them, or maybe a little younger. But then no one would follow along. They'd be like, okay, I'm doing Legion. Mark Waid would do it, and they were grown. They were clearly grown. Who's the name? Did Kids. Jeff Johns did Kids, but at the same time, you see Bendis do a totally, got to connect Black Lightning and Lightning Lad type of deal. So, and I don't know that for sure, but that's what I thought I heard. So everyone,
well, that's exactly what he did. That's exactly what he did. But the less about Bendis on the Legion, the better.
But I mean, ultimately, in my opinion, what they should have done, and you can't get the person to do it, is to get Jim Lee to do, I can't ask him to do layouts and do the Legion. Like that's what was supposed to happen.
Well, he did covers. That's probably the best you were going to get. He did covers.
I think having Francis Menapool on there, but he was also on the. Sad to say, he was on the Jim Shooter return, and that didn't. I mean, not to say that. Well, the stories weren't that great. Had a decent art, but at the same time, Shooter was critiquing his artists, where it's like, yo, this guy's gonna be something someday, and that's what Jim Shooter said. When this guy learns how to do storytelling, he's gonna be great. Like you want to make friends. take a note from what's it name, Doug Mensch, who's basically the smartest writer out there because he gets with his artists and writes to them, not says, hey, here's my story. Don't veer off from it. So I mean, no. Ultimately, I would say that the Legion wasn't rebooted when Crisis happened. It was one of the few titles that wasn't rebooted and didn't have too much stuff. But then with the way Crisis worked, that slowly stuff would change and it'd be like pre-crisis, post-crisis, and then
they weren't rebooted, but they sure got a hell of a retcon that started screwing the pooch.
I'm saying you can't really say it screwed it because it wasn't. The book had two titles and the miniseries. So in my sense of saying ultimately, the reboots. But I'm saying if the book is still selling and it's killing out there, I can't put it into the screwed part at that point.
Are you looking at overall sales, or are you looking at the foundation of the characters? Because that's the way I always looked at it. Everything's. I mean, I can come over and it's a book, and yeah, I'm out selling Superman. And then 10 years later, the book is canceled. So the whole idea, for me, the books that have the long and are able to, able to not to withstand that type of stuff is they usually have good foundation to return to. And when they always, we're going to take it back to basics. That nonsense after they, went over here and tried all this other stuff. And that retcon that they got for me, I was like, okay, that started the seeds of, hey, look, we can come over here and just screw around. Doesn't matter. We're still selling, so it doesn't matter.
Well, I hear you on that. I would just say that it's not just. I'm saying looking at this because the crash is the thing.
You're talking about the crash of the 1990s, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Because if you look at the '80s, not only did they have Tales, Legion. Then they had stuff that was present day that was supposed to be precursors to the Legion. Like it was a little, some of it to Shield, which Giffen was a part of. He was not only just a part of the 5 years later. He was doing those the Legion '89, Legion '90 series. So it's kind of the book was really. And the hard part of it is Keith Giffen and Paul Levitt had done entry, basic old school comics, but this was like when you see the stuff that the New Mutants and the X-Men and post the thing, the Pox on the X universe, all that stuff was done in the lead. Like the X-Men had some of this, but the Legion had taken on the what we would see Claremontian type storylines. This Giffen and Paul Levitt and Giffen run was just like a freight train, and it wasn't an entry level book. It was a X-Men multi-part comic, and it had to have a revolving cast because he had written it so long. At that point, he kind of put people on deck, and he would have new sort of characters come in from time to time. But like the original series was basically kind of a like American Idol type of thing, right? Because they'd have a hero come, they would critique him, they would have these stories where they make fun of these guys, and then at the same time they would have regular stories which were poignant stories at the same times too, but then they would go back to the clubhouse, here's some new characters, let's tear apart, let's trash these guys that have terrible powers. Even what was it, Wildfire, who's on there, he had, that was his origin. It's like saying you're kind of the same, we all can do that. And he's like, wow. And then the Wildfire, he gives himself he sacrifices himself, and then he becomes the benchmark of all of the membership when he wasn't even a member up to that point until he actually came back. So the book is how he described. My thing is not to really go because we can say it's the '86 thing and say that when they decided not to have Superboy anymore, we can say, I would more say, because I think the way they were doing, they had like Legionnaires and Legion of Superheroes in the '90s, so they were finding their footing. And I just feel like the people taking over should have followed that lead because they did have a accessible type of thing like it was in the past, and they kind of went away from it. Whereas Paul Levitt didn't really go accessible, and Paul Levitt kind of showed you that you can change Legion's future. Like you could go in the past, and he did like one of his big storyline, which was in Treasury Edition. You could change history, so it wouldn't be, you could figure a way around, not having Superboy because history changed, and Superboy dealt with it in the Treasury Edition, where it's like
But why
history.
would you do that?
Hmm?
Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to disconnect the Legion from Superboy? Why would you want to do that?
I'm not saying want to do that. I think ultimately Legion, I think the Legion of
Push,
Superheroes.
pushing on you what you just said over here. I'm saying from a writing standpoint, why would you want to do that? You're connected to this dude. There's really no reason to disconnect you. And the Legion is already on this rolling scale of the year 3000, where the year 3000 keeps getting pushed. It's like a further 3000 as opposed to where it was in 1964. But you have a direct connection right over here. The connection works. There was never anything wrong with it. Then it's like, all right, let's undermine it even more. It's a foundational part of your creation. Why do you want to change your foundation?
All right, so this is the hard part in looking because I've had this thing recently on DC where they said they used the cover of Who's Who and said Byrne should have just done a Supergirl series and a Golden Age Superman series, And he's a hot artist, so basically would sell anyway. And it's like, well, that's not the hard part of this part of DC, which is having, and this is not saying what's right or wrong, because I bought Legion of Superheroes with Superboy, I bought the New Adventures of Superboy, so at the same time I was a fan, right? But the pros, and this is not just Byrne, this is Marvel and DC pros going back and forth from I guess more so the Marvel, and they're saying, what's going wrong with DC? What is wrong with DC? Why are these books not selling? Why is Superman not selling? Why is Batman not selling? Why is Marvel killing these guys and they have the better characters? So ultimately, what the people were going from one to the other, looking at it and saying, these characters, which one point were unique, have 3, 4, 5 different versions of the same character, right? Whether you say the Superboy stories, I don't really buy into whether Superboy stories don't work or do work, because I bought them, right? And I didn't have a problem with it. But the problem that they saw was the characters were not unique anymore, right? Because they had 3 million of the other things. So to figure out how it going on, that was the whole process, which was the crisis thing, because you have Marv trying to streamline the entire line, right? And at the same time, Legion, whether you say it's umpteen years, the comic book industry was undercut because of the speculators, right? But you had something that was rolling, and I think the 10 years, the 5 years later is kind of going to where something that wasn't rebooted. It was just going further. And the only thing they had snipped regretfully was Superboy, but the cast was so huge and at the same time, Superboy, they had totally, at this point, actually outside of him coming back and briefly going to Smallville, they rarely went to Smallville while this thing was the hottest book out next to the Titans. So it's like they had totally eclipsed going to Smallville, and they were just kind of in the future, which is a better place for the Superboy going to. That was more fun for me, because it was like, you could see it'd be, falling into kind of the traps of, the stories where, oh, okay, here comes Lois and comes Lana, and she's, oh, so this means you guys are here. Obviously, you're Superboy. And he's like, no, you're not. And I think Paul Levitt did it where he had, what's that? Clark Kent was struggling with his identity because he didn't think he was Superboy. He thought he was either something else, or he thought he was, Ultra Boy. So he was like, Lana comes to him and he's like playing like he's Clark Kent, even though he is Clark Kent. He's like, no, Lana, you're wrong. And it's like, and then Lana's like, wait a second, you wouldn't even waste time with me. Something else is going on here. And I was like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. So I mean, but they kind of moved from that too. So the hard part of it is going from what he said. I hear you. I don't have a problem with Superboy. I just, what was happening is dealing with the low sales, and that's why they did what they did. And the Marvel guys like Marv, Lynn, that going to DC, working on the top books that were selling, and then going to DC and saying, why isn't this selling? Why is this working? Why is Perez is on Justice League and he leaves Justice League, sales go up when Don Heck is here? Why is Superman things sold down? So the only thing they had was that, hey, there's 3 million Green Lanterns, there's a bunch of different Supermans and Superboy, and that's the catalyst for the whole crisis thing. And I think that was the environment of it. So they already, and that the person I was arguing with on Facebook, it wasn't to argue, he just was like, hey, you had this multiverse thing, why are you cutting into it? And that's what they're doing now. So why didn't it work there? Why wasn't it connecting with the kids? They're just trying to fix it. And it was not just a Superman thing. It was a company wide. And in any instance, they pretty much, most people would have they probably would have nixed, if Miller, Wolfman, these guys probably would have nixed Superboy too, even though Burners did it and he deserves the blame for making that they would have tried to de-unique the character, and that was the why Marv de-unique the whole thing and saying there's only one Earth. And now you say, why is it? Come on, Marvel's doing all this multiverse. You're doing it on the TV shows, so it's just them trying to get the thing to say this is Superman is Superman. This is the stories. Batman doesn't have all these characters that don't help him out. They are weak. Robin and Batgirl, and the next thing I was like, wait a second, these characters are cool. So I mean, it's not to just defend the Byrne thing. It's just the way that they were trying to fix it. But to talk about what he was saying, the book wasn't that accessible. It was you had to buy it and you had to follow it. If you pick up any of these issues outside of the Great Darkness saga, it's a totally different cast as it goes along. It's definitely like a soap opera that you had to be in, and it was selling like hotcakes, and not Jim Shooter's your first issue is your favorite issue type of thing. But it's just the environment of why it was going on at the time. But anyway, so you're in the full meal that, hey, if they didn't they didn't do the 86 thing, it's Superman, it would the Legion would still be the top seller that it was.
No, hey, just mic check. You can hear me?
Yeah, you.
Okay. Yeah, I can't hear myself through my phones for some reason. Ugh. No, I mean, my personal opinion was that one of the reasons the Legion was successful is because they didn't reboot it. They made all these changes to everything else, and the Legion just kind of trucked along pretty much in the same fashion. Then, and this was like a slap in the face to anybody who enjoyed those Legion stories with Superboy. Then they said, "Oh, well, what happened with the whole thing with the connection with Superboy? We got to do something about that." Which they didn't have to. They could have just said, "Hey, we'll ignore this. It never really happened," and but they decided they wanted to address it. So they gave us a pretty good story. Where, and at the end of the day, Superboy gets off, and you look at it, you're like, "All right, there was no reason to undo this other than one." Byrne didn't really want to deal with the Legion and Superboy, and two, DC up top didn't care. They just really wanted Superman from scratch. They felt his history was just too unwieldy for anybody to really manage. They wanted him to start from brass tacks. Okay, that's the history as to that. With the Legion, however, I was like, hey, those guys went over and they did experience a good amount of success afterwards. Okay, they didn't have any issue with that, and I don't have any issue with that. It's when, hey, all of a sudden now it's like, wait a minute, the numbers are slipping. You don't have the same thing anymore. What are we going to do now? Oh, well, let's reboot. That's the same thing they did with Superman. Anytime they were like, all right, well, let's reboot them again. We'll do Birthright. We do Secret Origin. Hey, we'll do New 52. And with each successive one, it didn't really generate anything for the character. It made it more convoluted. It well, with Superman, I can't say it made it more convoluted, but it weakened what from that original thing, where this was Superman #1. Who doesn't like a #1 at the end of the day? Everybody runs in. It's got brand new artists after Kurt Swan had been on there. So there were some factors going in there, in addition that you know, what I thought what Byrne did initially was just easy. You could come in, it was like one and done episodes. You didn't have to have this backstory knowledge or anything, and that's what that's what they thought would bring in people, and it did. Then you did it again, and then you did it again with the Legion. And that's the only book that I can think of, with the exception of Hawkman, where they continuously just kept tinkering with the thing. Let's try this again, and then it became, hey, if it starts looking like it's going to run aground a bit, we can just reboot. But once they had Superboy, and this was not Superman. This was not Clark Kent as Superboy, but this was Connell dressed up as Superboy. I was just like, this is ridiculous. You just put the dude back at the end of the day. The whole idea was that, okay, you do what all these other guys do when they say, oh, look, the sales are slipping. Okay, we go back to basics. All of a sudden now, like, what do we do? We had Peter Parker. Peter Parker was he was over there working as a college professor. Uh-oh, sales are slipping. All right, let's bring him back to basics. We're going to come over here, bring him back to the Daily Planet. He may not be a photographer, but we'll have some of that J. Jonah Jameson interaction again, and try to get that going and see if we can go someplace else. It's standard stuff at the end of the day. And then with the Legion, you couldn't go back to basics because you undermined your own foundation. And then, unfortunately, it kind of separated stuff because you had people like me who enjoyed the Legion with Superboy, enjoyed the Legion without Superboy. Okay. Did I enjoy? Do I really have a soft spot for the stuff with Legion and Superboy? Yeah, that's the stuff that I came in with. It was great. It was great stuff to read, but it wasn't something that had to happen every issue or anything. But keep that lineage and that link together. Then you have the guys who are like, no, the first keep Superboy out of the book. Superboy comes into the book, it's going to ruin the Legion. We don't need him there whatsoever. And then you got the other converse, which is no, if Superboy's not in the book, I don't want to read it. That's not where you want to be with this book, especially when you got a connection to a character like Superman through Superboy. It's just malpractice at the end of the day. Eventually, your sales go soft. You're the Legion of Superheroes. You're not Batman. You're not Spider Man. You're not Superman. Okay, you're not this this globally known commodity. Eventually, your sales are going to slip. When it's time for you to regenerate some interest, when it's time for you to go back to basics, what do you do over here? Well, you took your basics away. Okay, that foundation that you had for it, you took that away, and then they were like, "Well, let's fall into the trap of rebooting." Okay, we can always make it fresh again, throw in some characters, put a brand new number 1 on it, see what happens. And readers show you that reboots do work initially. You will make some numbers. Everybody loves that number 1, and then you run aground again. Now, I mean, but I thought what Keith Giffen was saying was not so much that keeping the characters young, but that it was a book where young and new readers found that they could come into and enjoy it immediately. Not that he had to keep the characters a certain age or that the characters needed to be a certain age, but this was a book where it had the youngest readership because it was the easiest book to access for them as opposed to maybe some of the other stuff. And so they were willing to give that book more of a try.
I that's when I think he's probably having trying to distance the Legion from the Legion fandom because ultimately as as a as a series when it was actually when it actually was a its own series rather than like a backup type of thing when he was doing it, it was not it wasn't the it was a X-Men type of thing where it's actually happened around the same time. And Paul Levitt had been on the book since before Giffen got there on a separate run. I think Jerry Conway is in the middle of that, but they were had already moved away from. It was doing like Neil Adams type of thing, like where it's like you see his run where it's just like a kind of a like a just a a romp. Whereas the early stories were the thing where you can like here's a story, here's a villain, here's that, here's let's go back to square one type of deal. So it's kind of looking at a book and saying where people look at the X-Men and say this is just like really like the way Cockrum had the first say where they're like globetrotting. It's basically really a lot like that where they're galactic police, and it's not really. It's you can say that about the earlier stuff when it was adventures, but as you move on past it to the stuff that's when they got there, when they took over Superboy's title, they kind of it was really just something that you had to look at where it was a fandom type of thing, and they were bigger. Like X-Men had this cult, but it wasn't as the cult fandom didn't save the book. Like the cult fandom of Legion was enough to sustain that book for them, where DC was like they didn't really see it as its own title. They saw it as a backup, and that's why it maintained being a backup until they tested out with a reprint. So the other thing is, I'd only say that the book wasn't necessarily rebooted. That's what I'm saying. The key thing is that the book wasn't rebooted because of the book was rebooted when someone else would take over the title. So it was like that's the hard part in there where there's no continuity, a sense of saying, "Hey, I'm Mark Waid. I'm the top guy on the planet right now. I'm gonna fix this." When it's just like these Mary was a Tom and Mary Birnbaum, I think that's who they were. They did all this legwork and all this stuff, and next thing you know, it's not a thing of saying, "Hey, these guys." It's like, "Hey, we're moving on. We're getting we got this name on this book," and it's like you're out. And then at the same time, I think Same with the Justice League, right? With the Justice League tanked. The Justice League tanked in the 80s with the bad choice of characters, which was rightfully so. They had to try to move out the heroes into their own books and not have them always in the Justice League. But in the 90s, they were like, we need to put the main guys together, right? So they put the main guys together in the Midsummer's Night Dream with some of the top. Well, I guess Mark no, Fabian Essenza is not always considered one of the top writers, but he was writing the top book. Him and Wade got together and they had a successful Justice League thing. So they immediately like, boom, let's do that. And at the same time, it took them forever to do a Titans thing, which was a Devin Grayson. So it was just like they had titles that were successful that they were kind of, you know, not sticking with anymore, and that had some bad times. But it was just like when the new people would come on, it wouldn't be like you had all this stuff that with the younger people, and Chris Sprouse, I think it was Chris Sprouse was on it and whatnot, and a bunch of Alan Davis did a couple issues and that sort of thing. But it looked like it was a uniform thing, and it's just like Mark Wade gets on it, I'm a name, that's out of here. Hey, if Jeff Johns gets on there, I gotta fix it. I gotta give you my own thing. So it's more the creators could have, like the way Superman, they did have the other reboots, but at the same time, the continuity was basically the same until what's that thing? The New 52, which is like, and then with the New 52, did they have a Legion with the New 52?
No.
So yeah, so it's like, so how do you do a thing and you just decide, we're not going to do that. We can't. You got to maintain some sort of continuity, and the Legion in my in the how it was practiced in the 80s, whereas you see post this part, like it could be anybody on that cover, and that shows you that. Then that the fact that when in the 80s, was it Polar Boy became the leader and one of the most important members, and he was a part of the Legion of Substitute Legionnaires. So it's like that was the part of what the book was that it was this. It's hard to say it because I don't want to. I know that the 5 years later was a very a big departure, and they did try to course correct while it was going on. By 16, they made him younger and they brought in different artists. But Keith Giffen, well, the hard part is Keith Giffen is Mr. Reboot. Byrne is the first person involved in a reboot, right? And Keith Giffen rebooted or did his like a sort of a. It was no, because there was a reboot within it. He did a whole different origin of the Legion. Not only that, then we got the Green Lantern, Aquaman. It's like, it's too far gone. Crisis is too far over there. Nope, we got to do it again. And his statement to doing the 5 years later was he wanted to keep it separate from what Paul Levitt did. Nobody else did that. Nobody tried to keep it separate. Jerry Conway, his whole plan was, I think Roy Thomas kind of nipped the plan and accelerated it. But you couldn't tell the difference between Jerry Conway to Roy Thomas to Paul Levitt right before the Darkness Saga. It's like you got these three writer editors, and they changed what Conway wanted to do because Reflector was going to be there for much longer, and Roy Thomas was like, I don't want to do that. And he was only there for like 2 issues, and then Paul Levitt's on there. So you have, but as a reader, you don't know that there's any that they undercut what Conway was doing. It's just like, hey, it's just fun, that sort of thing. So you can have multiple writers get on the title, and well, they did that at Marvel too. You have Roy Thomas, and you have Ling Wen doing the Fantastic Four, then you have Marv Wolfman, and you can't really see too much of a difference in who's writing. And that's what I think is lost as far as DC. With a title that didn't get canceled or rebooted, you could have just kind of you keep Giffen gets on there. But the problem is also the art. He was doing those grids, so hopefully, I think it sold well initially, but I think they were in this turmoil point after that 5 years later, and then I think, but the Burn Bombs, I feel, got them where they're supposed to be, and people like, nah, we don't need to do that. I'm Mark Wade. Okay, now we're changing the Legion title to Supergirl in the Legion. It's like, uh. But anyway, yeah, I think you need to, as Keith Giffen knows, the Legion fans need to be credited for that amount of time believing in those guys and pushing for DC to give them a title, because DC, and you have Mort Wesinger who's behind it. You have they didn't decide to do it. It was the fans writing in and then finally, trying it out in the Superboy thing, and then next they're like, we think this is what's carrying the book. So then they changed it to Superboy and the Legion, and then they slowly realized that they could do, have do stories without him, and then at some point they're like, no, well, we'll have him, come back, once or twice a year type of deal, that sort of thing. So they kind of found a good middle ground. But this is all in the span of 70s to the 80s where they were going through this. But the title, just like they in 81, they were getting royalties from this book. It's like, and this is a key part where they were like, it was the Legion. Like the Legion was this big thing. So I think you got to give the Legion Outposts and those guys the credit for really pushing for it, because whatever DC was seeing, and they didn't see it at that point. So
I don't think anybody's taking any credit away from those dudes. They're not asking about the foundation of the Legion, or the dedication that people showed to the book, that got it its own title, or that nature. They're asking at the point where, look, when the sales were no longer what they were before, okay, why weren't they able to get that back? And what were some of the reasons for it at the end of the day? Everything else that happened, Keith Giffen is straight in line with. And he's not saying that the book should have never been rebooted because he did it. It's that sense of wonder and entryway that entryway storytelling that a lot of people were able to get on board with. They didn't continue with that. But there was this hardcover special right before 2000, right before the New 52. They came out with this hardcover special for Superboy for Superman. It was narrated by Brainiac 5. Did you buy it?
no, no.
This is a hardcover special, and it's Superman's life being narrated by Brainiac 5. This
Mm-hmm.
is his full life. This is his full thing, where Brainiac notes that he's looking at Superman's history from the year 3000. He's saying, look, sometimes we're connected to Superman's history and sometimes we're not. So that book right over there, I enjoyed reading because, this was it was Brainiac 5, relating it. So this is like, Brainy, and with the Legion, I don't know, with the Legion, it was always like you were getting a peek into Superman's childhood as much as you could because of his interaction. But so Brainiac's pretty much, but even he's acknowledging the the inconsistencies of their own history into connection to Superman's history. Now, again, nobody's saying any of the previous stuff, anything that happened previous, uh, nobody has any issue with that. And as long as sales are good, people don't care. Sales are good. They're going through the roof. Hey, take him out of the book. Oh, we don't need him. Get rid of all this. I always say is, what happens when your sales slip, which always happens. Okay, what happens when your sales slip? What are you able to do? What are you going to be able to do at that point? And then it's what you do going forward it's what you do going forward that highlights, okay. And again, a lot of it's all it's all Monday morning quarterback, because it can't be anything else than that at the end of the day. But it does highlight those particular things. Well, yeah, this right over here, yeah, this is something probably we shouldn't have done. Maybe we can shore that up. But even now, I mean, I don't even know if there's a Legion series out right now. The last thing they were doing, they were fighting the Justice League, which wasn't even a fight. It was the Justice League versus the Legion of Superheroes, and it was 4 issues of absolutely nothing going on. But it was written by Bendis, so what else can I say at the end of the day? And Bendis brings them back. He's got a black lightning lad, which made no sense whatsoever at the end of the day. I mean, the idea is that the Legion is 3,000, they're in the year 3,000. We just hit 2,000. So somehow the lineage of Black Lightning was maintained all the way to the year 3,000. It was just stupid. And again, it fundamentally undercut these characters. It just fundamentally had it's like to do what? To show some diversity? Throw another Tyrock in there if you need to do if you really need to do that. And then I look with the changes that Bendis made, okay, they're gonna reboot them again. Because nobody's going to follow that nonsense that he was doing at the end of the day. And nobody wants to. And that's where you need like a Mort Wessinger or a Julie Schwartz. Like, no, 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 no. This stuff right over here, this stuff stays. Don't mess around with that. The other stuff, yeah, you can go over here. Don't, no, this right over here, no. It's just going to be a problem. And they have the foresight to see, yeah, what goes up is going to come down, and we need to be able to go somewhere with these characters when and if that actually does happen. And you would think if you got a book like Superman, Batman was like they were talking about canceling Batman, and they're saying, hey, why aren't we selling these books at the end of the day? And then you're like, well, the Legion is doing fine. It's not going to happen to these guys. These guys are somehow going to be impervious to soft sales. So,
Well,
with Keith Giffen, I thought, from what I was getting, the Legion was an entryway book. It was a gateway book for a lot of new readers, a lot of young readers. And slowly but surely, it no longer was that book. And, for me, it's like, okay, when things get rough, you can always go back and do like hey, we're going to return to Smallville for a grand adventure or something. Get some people back up on this book and then push away. You can always do that to, just try to restore a little bit of what you're losing and then go forward with it. You don't have to, Superboy doesn't have to be there every other page at the end of the day, but it's good to have that link. I just don't see any reason. I wouldn't get rid of it. When in doubt, just keep it on. But I don't get to write the books. I just get to read them.
well, that's I think one of the issues that people, it's more like let's reverse time and move away from the whole thing. And at the same time, I think the way Paul, well, no, ultimately, I have to point this out. The point that I'm having issue with is saying it's an accessible book, right? When the book is, if you look at the X-Men and you say the X-Men are this freight train that's convoluted, that has all these storylines that are going on at from this is from a almost an entire decade of stuff from say this from the like or less than a decade because we got what's this 81 when this cover is out there till about that. That's like 5 years of saying this is a solid dynamic for a comic book, which is the same way the X-Men was. That's not a solid dynamic for a accessible book for the most youngest readers that were out there. When this book was rolling, like when Superman is selling what he's selling and this book is rolling, the book was this book that was a comic fan that was when you became a comic fan, you got into this, you fell into it the same way people fall into the X-Men or say the X-Men's impenetrable, the same way this book is. So it's like, it's nice to say that this was a book that was, that the youngest thing was, but it was a book. And I'm saying I bought this as a kid, at the same time, it was getting into comic books that the same dynamic that I liked in the X-Men was in that. And the X-Men was a freight train where the dynamic of what Kirby and Lee was an accessible book of these kids in school or a school like, they didn't actually go to school, but they're a school like dynamic and they fought supervillains. That's a simple, accessible thing. The early stories of the Legion were simple, sort of, as I said, like a American Idol, where they would have someone come up and they would say the issues with their powers or they prove themselves or that sort of thing, or they would do, or someone would, they had the feral lad. But those are like backup stories. Like that wasn't selling its own thing. That was here you're getting a Legion story, a Supergirl story, a Superboy story, or a Green Lantern, Green Arrow story type of thing. When this book was a book that was on its own, it was a cosmic freight train that was not something that you could just say was a book that was just here. This is for the lowest common denominator. This was a comic. This is what we look at as comic
That,
book.
but he never says that. He never says that it was the lowest common denominator book. He says it was. He says the readership of the book, okay, was overwhelmingly young new readers. He doesn't say it wasn't convoluted. Okay, he doesn't say that it was some one and done stuff, but for whatever reason, it was still accessible for them with all that convoluted stuff you're talking about.
What I'm saying, that is that period where as comic fans, where we can get into like 100 issues or something like that sort of thing, and have this sort of thing where you look at a Superman story. It's not that. A Superman Silver Age, Bronze Age is a pickup. This, yes, it has a ton of history, but that is an accessible um from how, because my wording isn't exactly how you said it, so the wording you use for it, those Superman books from that period was you pick up for the young reader, and you get a full story that had some history, but it wasn't like there's a difference in how those type of books are, and I think it's almost describing how a Superman book would be, which would be something where at some point those books was in the millions selling. Like in the late, it was at least printing at least the millions to do the comic book split of 600,000 copies sold type of thing. But that's what I consider a how you described, how you're saying that what's the name described. I'm not going to use my words because it's going to be off. So how you described it was how like a Superman book would be from the 50s and 60s, that was selling well more than the X-Men. That's the kind of accessible type of thing that I would see. The Legion was kind of like this well, not post, I think when it became its own title, it was a big cosmic type of Neil Adams type of book, even before it became Paul Levitt's type of thing. So that's the only thing I was saying. There's a comic book dynamic that's a little bit, like them being, like the Mike Grell, like these like really muscular type of thing characters. It was like really going to that Neil Adams type of deal, which is a little different than what I would consider, at least in my mind, how like Superman was something where you could pick up and read like the 60s to 40s, and all those stories are pretty straightforward. I would say for the Legion, you'd have to pick up like an arc of stories type of deal. So it's just a dynamic of what would be an accessible type of, however it was described. I'd have to listen to the podcast to get it exactly right, but there's a dynamic that's a comic book thing that kind of comes from Kirby and Lee and Neil Adams, that kind of is in this book, that when it really started rolling, and that's kind of a little different than even though the Fantastic Four was an accessible book, that Neil Adams run is just like a freight train. And by going into it as a comic fan, when you're really into them, it's just like this is the end all be all type of deal, But I always look at the more accessible stuff as like, picking up the first Bizarro and Superboy, where it's like, here's the scientists, and this experiment leads to this type of thing. So anyway, the hard part is that with a lot of success comes, as you were saying, the low sales, and gruffly, even Superman was going through it. So, and Batman, and obviously Wonder Woman. So, but it's a part of what comic books go through, and you have to try things. I just kind of wish they just kind of try to keep the continuity as much as they could of whatever the last one was, instead of saying, "Shh, out of here." I'm Mark Waid. I'm the guy. And it's like, oh yeah, this is it. We got what we wanted. And it's like, what happened? No, we got Jeff Johns. Like, Jeff Johns, you missed to pick up the entire, to pick up the what last happened and make it all make sense. No, no, I'm Mr. Reboot now. I get the chance to reboot now. Like what?
Julie Schwartz would have never let that happen.
Yeah, I forget who I had the editor in mind who took over it. It's Explicit, and he's one who chanced it to listen to the readers and chanced it. But ultimately, I'm glad to hear that. Well, no, I think there's what was it? I hope he gets to talk to the Watchmen was such an influence on him, because I don't think that was something that really worked for his style of art. I think what really made him famous was those wide shots, and like what I just had the picture of the Legion, those wide shots, which would I think he'd almost be the perfect person to work with Jim Shooter, because he would do like really big wide, and it helped with having that many characters. And it was like a perfect storm, because at the same time, Paul was it Pat Broderick was drawing a couple issues before that, and those issues were really gorgeous too. So it was like, and it was in between the two of them. So I think the book being a huge success, being a bigger success and getting a second title was going to happen regardless. But it's a really harsh difference between how he started the book and then how he took it on his own, and it was more like interpersonal stuff. No action. Only action is the first is issue 4, which was dynamic, and it's like, oh yeah, finally. Okay, no, we're not going to do that no more. That was a goodbye to Monel. Oh no, it's not a book. Monel's back. He's Valor now. It's like, I don't know about DC, but anyway, I guess I have to listen to this podcast and see how outraged I can get. But he's a talent. He should have done Captain America. He had a nice pitch for Captain America in what's the name? In Marvel Age. So I really wish he got to do Captain America, but he did do his Lunatic, which is his Lobo for Marvel. So, any last words? Well, any last words? Any last words? Adding more content.
No. Long live Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. Okay. One day they will get it right.
All right then. Spinnerack out. Wait a second. Did you get your out in there? Spinnerack.
Out?
There we go.